Family Feud for more than 2 decades, navigating thousands of family dynamics and witnessing virtually every conceivable variation of human behavior under the pressure of game show competition. However, nothing in his extensive experience could have prepared him for what would unfold on a crisp October afternoon in 2024. The studio audience settled into their seats with anticipation. The familiar upbeat music filled the air, creating an atmosphere of excitement and possibility. And two families stood ready to compete in what everyone assumed would be another entertaining episode featuring the customary mix of laughter, competitive spirit, and perhaps a few memorable incorrect answers that would showcase Steve's legendary comedic reactions. The Reynolds family from Pennsylvania faced off against the Kim family from California, both teams projecting enthusiasm and family solidarity as they took their positions on the brightly lit stage. What began as a seemingly typical family game show would transform into one of the most stunning moments in television history, as a husband's pattern of contemptuous criticism toward his wife's family would escalate to such intolerable levels that Steve Harvey would make the unprecedented decision to end the game entirely, choosing to prioritize human dignity over entertainment and demonstrating that some behaviors cross lines that cannot be ignored regardless of format or commercial considerations. The Reynolds family consisted of 5 members who presented themselves as a successful professional unit when they first appeared on the Family Feud stage. Leading the team was 46-year-old Gregory Reynolds, a corporate attorney from Philadelphia who carried himself with the arrogant confidence of someone accustomed to dominating conversations and controlling situations through force of personality and professional status. His expensive suit, imposing physical presence, and dismissive manner communicated superiority and barely concealed contempt for those he considered beneath his social and intellectual level. Standing beside him was his wife of 19 years, Maria Reynolds, a 43-year-old woman whose gentle demeanor and quiet dignity created immediate sympathy from the studio audience despite the tension visible in her posture and expression. Maria worked as a bilingual social worker serving immigrant families, a demanding profession requiring both cultural sensitivity and emotional resilience in helping vulnerable populations navigate complex systems. Their 2 children completed the primary family unit. 15-year-old David stood on the stage with visible discomfort that suggested familiarity with his father's difficult personality, while 12-year-old Alina displayed nervous energy that seemed related more to family dynamics than to the prospect of being on television. Completing the team were Maria's mother and brother, 68-year-old Rosa Martinez and 40-year-old Carlos Martinez, both of whom had immigrated to the United States from Mexico 30 years earlier and had built successful lives through hard work and determination despite facing significant barriers related to language and discrimination. Maria Reynolds had been hesitant when Gregory insisted they apply to appear on Family Feud. She had expressed concerns about how her husband would behave on national television, particularly regarding his treatment of her family members, whom he had consistently belittled and criticized throughout their marriage. Gregory had dismissed her concerns, arguing that appearing on a popular game show would be good for his professional image and that her family should be grateful for the opportunity he was providing them to participate in something they would never have access to without his involvement. Maria had reluctantly agreed to submit the application, writing carefully about their family dynamics while omitting the tensions and conflicts that characterized many of their interactions. For Maria, this appearance represented something she had hoped might remind Gregory of the importance of family and perhaps encourage him to treat her mother and brother with more respect and kindness. What Maria could not have anticipated was that this day would expose Gregory's contempt so completely and publicly that it would force a reckoning that went far beyond family dynamics to challenge fundamental questions about what behavior society should tolerate and what standards of human decency must be maintained even in contexts designed primarily for entertainment. If you have ever wondered how patterns of disrespect eventually reach points where intervention becomes necessary, and how one person's courageous decision to refuse continued tolerance of cruelty can establish boundaries that protect human dignity, Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that remind us of the importance of treating all people with respect regardless of their background, and the moral courage required to stand up against contempt and prejudice, even when doing so disrupts normal proceedings and challenges comfortable assumptions about what we should accept in the name of avoiding conflict. The game began with typical enthusiasm and energy that characterized Family Feud episodes. The Kim family played with genuine warmth and mutual encouragement, celebrating correct answers and supporting one another through inevitable mistakes with grace and good humor. The Reynolds family's participation was markedly different from the outset, with Gregory dominating team discussions, dismissing suggestions from Maria's family members, and making barely concealed expressions of frustration when Rosa or Carlos stepped up to answer questions. The studio audience began to sense discomfort with the family dynamics even before any explicitly problematic behavior had occurred, responding to the subtle cues in Gregory's body language and tone that communicated disdain and superiority. The first indication that serious problems were developing emerged during the second round, when Rosa Martinez approached the podium to answer a question. Steve had asked contestants to name something people do to relax after a stressful day at work. Rosa answered in accented but clear English that people cook a special meal to relax and find comfort. Before Steve could reveal whether the answer appeared on the board, Gregory made a comment loud enough for the microphones to capture. He stated dismissively that of course Maria's mother would say cooking, because that was all she knew how to do, and that perhaps if she had pursued education or a real career, she might have more sophisticated answers to offer. The studio audience gasped audibly at the comment, shocked by the casual cruelty and obvious contempt Gregory had expressed toward his mother-in-law on national television. Steve Harvey's expression transformed immediately from his customary warm engagement to something considerably more serious as he processed what he had just heard. However, the game had to continue according to its format, and Steve revealed that cooking a special meal was indeed on the board as the number 4 answer, earning the family 12 points. Rosa returned to her position with visible hurt in her expression, while Maria's face reflected a combination of embarrassment and suppressed anger that suggested this was far from the first time she had witnessed her husband treat her family with such disrespect. The game proceeded through another round, but Gregory's pattern of contemptuous comments continued and escalated. When Carlos provided an answer during the third round, Gregory loudly questioned how someone who had only completed high school could be expected to understand the question properly, adding that he supposed they should be grateful Carlos was trying despite his obvious limitations. The comment was delivered with a tone that communicated not just criticism but active contempt, treating Carlos as fundamentally inferior rather than simply mistaken in his game show response. Steve Harvey's patience with Gregory's behavior was clearly wearing thin. He addressed Gregory directly, suggesting that perhaps he should focus on encouraging his family members rather than criticizing them, and noting that the show was supposed to be fun rather than an opportunity to belittle people. Gregory responded dismissively, stating that he was simply being honest and that perhaps Steve would understand his perspective if he had to deal with the challenges of having in-laws who had never fully assimilated to American culture and continued to cling to backward traditions and limited perspectives. The studio audience erupted into disapproving murmurs at this comment, recognizing it as overtly prejudiced and cruel. Steve's expression hardened further, but before he could respond, the game format required proceeding to the next round. The Reynolds family had managed to accumulate enough points to win the main game despite the toxic atmosphere Gregory had created, and they advanced to fast money. According to standard procedure, 2 family members would participate in this final round to attempt to score 200 points and win the $20,000 prize. Gregory immediately declared that he and his son David would play fast money, dismissing any possibility of Maria's family members participating in this crucial final round. He stated explicitly that he was not going to risk losing the prize money because Maria's mother or brother could not understand the questions properly or provide answers that reflected mainstream American perspectives rather than their immigrant mentality. The comment was delivered with such obvious contempt and prejudicial assumption that it crossed a line from simple rudeness into something that reflected deeper bigotry and discriminatory attitudes. What happened next would become one of the most significant moments in Family Feud history and would spark conversations about the responsibilities of media platforms when confronted with behavior that violates basic standards of human decency. Steve Harvey made a decision that stunned everyone present. He stopped the game entirely, signaling to the production crew that taping was ending immediately. He then addressed Gregory Reynolds directly, and what he said would demonstrate moral courage and commitment to human dignity that transcended entertainment considerations. Steve told Gregory that in 20 years of hosting Family Feud, he had never stopped a game in progress because of a contestant's behavior, but that what he had witnessed over the past several rounds represented a level of disrespect, contempt, and prejudice that he would not allow to continue on his stage. Steve explained that Gregory had repeatedly insulted and belittled his wife's family members, had made comments that reflected prejudice against immigrants and people with different educational backgrounds, and had demonstrated a pattern of behavior that was fundamentally incompatible with the values of respect and human dignity that should characterize any interaction between people regardless of their backgrounds or circumstances. Steve continued by addressing the specific nature of Gregory's comments, pointing out that he had attacked Rosa and Carlos, not for anything they had actually done wrong but rather for who they were, for their accents, their immigrant status, their educational backgrounds, and their cultural traditions. Steve explained that such attacks were not simply rude, but rather reflected prejudices and discriminatory attitudes that caused real harm to vulnerable people and contributed to broader patterns of marginalization and mistreatment of immigrant communities. Steve made clear that while he understood that Family Feud was a game show designed for entertainment, he would not allow his platform to be used to normalize or reward contemptuous treatment of people based on their backgrounds. He stated that some things were more important than completing a television episode or avoiding the commercial complications that would result from stopping production, and that maintaining basic standards of human decency and refusing to tolerate bigotry fell into that category of fundamental priorities that could not be compromised. Steve then turned his attention to Rosa and Carlos Martinez, speaking to them with genuine respect and warmth. He told them that they had done nothing wrong and had no reason to feel embarrassed or diminished by Gregory's comments. Steve explained that Gregory's contempt reflected his own character flaws and prejudices rather than any actual deficiencies in their knowledge, capabilities, or worth as human beings. He apologized on behalf of the show for subjecting them to such treatment and assured them that they deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. Steve addressed Maria Reynolds directly, acknowledging the impossible position she had been placed in by having to witness her husband publicly humiliate her family members. He told her that no one should have to choose between loyalty to a spouse and defending their family from contemptuous treatment, and that Gregory's behavior had created exactly that untenable situation. Steve made clear that he hoped Maria would recognize that she and her children deserved to be part of a family dynamic characterized by mutual respect rather than hierarchy based on prejudice and contempt. Steve then spoke to David and Elena, the Reynolds children who had watched their father treat their grandmother and uncle with such obvious disdain. He explained to them that the way their father had behaved was not acceptable or normal, and that they should not internalize messages suggesting that people with different backgrounds or educational levels deserve contemptuous treatment. Steve emphasized that true strength and character involve treating all people with respect, and that diminishing others to elevate oneself reflects weakness rather than superiority. Finally, Steve made an announcement that would have significant implications for everyone involved. He declared that because he had ended the game due to Gregory's unacceptable behavior, no prize money would be awarded. However, he stated that he would personally provide $5,000 to Maria Reynolds to use as she saw fit, explaining that he wanted to ensure she had resources that might help her make whatever decisions she needed to make about her future and her children's well-being. Steve also announced that he would donate an additional $5,000 to organizations supporting immigrant families and workers, stating that he wanted something positive to emerge from this deeply negative situation. The production crew worked quickly to facilitate the Reynolds family's departure from the studio, providing separate transportation for Maria and her family members so they would not have to share a car with Gregory after what had occurred. Steve Harvey personally ensured that Maria had contact information for family counseling services, support resources for people in relationships characterized by contempt and emotional abuse, and legal resources if she chose to pursue separation or divorce based on Gregory's pattern of behavior toward her and her family. When news of what had happened spread through entertainment media in the days following the taping, the response was overwhelmingly supportive of Steve Harvey's decision to end the game rather than allow Gregory's contemptuous behavior to continue. Commentary from cultural critics, immigrant advocacy organizations, and mental health professionals praised Steve for using his platform to establish clear boundaries around acceptable behavior, and for refusing to normalize prejudice and contempt, even when doing so created commercial complications for the show. The decision not to air the episode in any form was made jointly by Steve Harvey, the production company, and the network after extensive discussions about whether there was any way to present what had occurred that would serve educational purposes without giving additional platform to Gregory's prejudiced statements. The consensus was that the risks of amplifying his contemptuous views outweighed any potential benefits from documenting the confrontation and Steve's response. However, Steve spoke about the incident in general terms during subsequent interviews, explaining his reasoning for ending the game and emphasizing the importance of refusing to tolerate behavior that demeans people based on their backgrounds. Gregory Reynolds faced significant professional and social consequences from the incident despite the episode never airing. Word of what had occurred spread through his professional network and social circles, with multiple people who had been present in the studio audience or involved in the production sharing accounts of his behavior. His law firm received complaints from clients and colleagues, expressing concern about having their legal matters handled by someone who had demonstrated such obvious prejudice and contempt toward people from different backgrounds. The firm conducted an internal review and ultimately asked Gregory to resign, citing concerns about his behavior and its potential impact on the firm's reputation and relationships with diverse clients and communities. Maria Reynolds used the money Steve Harvey had provided to secure legal representation and filed for separation from Gregory 2 months after the Family Feud incident. In proceedings that followed, she cited Gregory's long-standing pattern of contemptuous treatment of her family members and his demonstration of values fundamentally incompatible with the kind of environment she wanted for her children. The separation eventually became a divorce, with Maria receiving primary custody of David and Alina, based in part on evidence of Gregory's pattern of behavior that created a hostile environment for the children's relationship with their maternal grandmother and uncle. Rosa and Carlos Martinez spoke publicly about the incident several months later, explaining that while the experience had been deeply hurtful and humiliating, they were grateful that Steve Harvey had refused to allow Gregory's contemptuous treatment to continue unchallenged. They noted that immigrant families frequently experienced similar prejudice and disdain in contexts where no one with authority stepped forward to establish boundaries or defend their dignity, and that Steve's willingness to end the game rather than tolerate such behavior had sent an important message about the unacceptability of treating people with contempt based on their backgrounds. Steve Harvey continued to reference the incident in general terms when discussing the responsibilities that come with having a media platform and the importance of establishing clear boundaries around acceptable behavior. He explained that while ending the game had created commercial complications and required difficult conversations with network executives and sponsors, he had never questioned whether it was the right decision. Steve emphasized that some principles could not be compromised regardless of convenience or economic considerations, and that refusing to normalize contempt and prejudice fell clearly into that category of non-negotiable moral standards. The Reynolds family incident became a significant case study in discussions about the responsibilities of media platforms when confronted with behavior that violates basic standards of human decency. Academic researchers studying media ethics and representation of diverse communities analyzed the incident as an example of the tensions between entertainment imperatives and moral obligations, noting that Steve Harvey's decision to prioritize dignity over completion of the game represented a model for how platforms should respond when participants engage in behavior that causes harm to vulnerable populations. Organizations working with immigrant communities incorporated discussions of the incident into their advocacy and educational work, using it to illustrate both the prevalence of contemptuous attitudes toward immigrants and the importance of having allies willing to challenge such attitudes even at personal or professional cost. The incident became referenced in training materials for educators, employers, and service providers working with diverse populations, serving as an example of how to respond effectively when witnessing discriminatory or prejudiced behavior rather than allowing it to proceed unchallenged. 2 years after the incident, Maria Reynolds had rebuilt her life in ways that reflected her values and priorities. She had advanced in her social work career, taking on leadership roles in programs serving immigrant families, and using her own experience with Gregory's prejudice to inform her understanding of the challenges her clients faced. Her relationship with her mother and brother had strengthened significantly following her separation from Gregory, with Rosa and Carlos playing active roles in supporting Maria and helping her raise David and Elena in an environment that celebrated their bicultural heritage rather than treating it as something inferior or shameful. David and Elena Reynolds participated in therapy to help them process their father's behavior and to unlearn messages they had internalized about hierarchy and worth based on background and education. Both children developed closer relationships with their grandmother and uncle following the separation, learning to appreciate their family's immigrant story and the resilience and determination that had characterized Rosa and Carlos's journey in building successful lives despite facing significant barriers and discrimination. Gregory Reynolds largely disappeared from public view following the incident and the professional consequences that resulted from it. He relocated to a different city and attempted to rebuild his legal career with limited success, finding that his reputation had been significantly damaged by widespread knowledge of his behavior on Family Feud and his pattern of contemptuous treatment of his wife's family. His relationship with his children remained strained, with both David and Elena maintaining minimal contact and expressing ongoing disappointment in their father's values and behavior. The lasting significance of Steve Harvey's decision to end the game extended beyond the immediate impact on the Reynolds family. It represented a cultural moment in which a person with platform and authority chose to prioritize human dignity over entertainment value and commercial considerations, demonstrating that media figures have both the power and the responsibility to establish boundaries around acceptable behavior and to refuse complicity in normalizing prejudice and contempt. Steve's willingness to accept the complications that resulted from stopping production sent a message that some principles are non-negotiable regardless of context or convenience. As we reflect on this powerful story, it serves as a reminder that contempt directed at people based on their backgrounds represents a form of prejudice that causes real harm and contributes to broader patterns of marginalization and discrimination. Steve Harvey's decision to end the game rather than allow such behavior to continue demonstrated moral courage and commitment to human dignity that challenged everyone witnessing it to examine their own responses to prejudice and their willingness to establish boundaries, even when doing so creates discomfort or complications. If this story has reminded you of the importance of treating all people with respect regardless of their backgrounds, the courage required to stand up against contempt and prejudice, even when doing so disrupts normal proceedings, or the responsibility we all share to refuse tolerance of behavior that demeans vulnerable populations, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who might benefit from understanding that some behaviors cross lines that cannot be ignored, that protecting human dignity sometimes requires difficult decisions that prioritize principle over convenience, and that each of us has the power and responsibility to challenge contempt and prejudice when we witness it rather than allowing it to proceed unchallenged in the name of avoiding conflict or maintaining comfortable social dynamics.